guys, how's it going? TJ here with Dead History, and I'm here today with Henry.
Hello.
And today is our next installment of our Declaration of Independence Signer series, and we're taking a look at the guy behind us. Who is that, Henry?
Thomas Heyward.
That's right, Thomas Heyward Jr. from the state of?
South Carolina.
You almost said North Carolina, but it's
South Carolina.
South Carolina. That's right, our second signer from the state of South Carolina. Some very, very interesting things to tell you about Thomas Heyward Jr. But first, before we do that, Henry, what do the people got to do?
Hit subscribe down below, leave all your comments and questions, hit the thumbs up, and hit the notification bell.
You did it, yeah. Hit subscribe down below, give us a like and a thumbs up, leave all those comments and questions. We love those. And of course, hit the little notification bell so you can be notified when we do release a new video. And Henry, when is that?
Every single week.
Every single week, he's right. So here we go. Next Declaration of Independence Signer Series video, Thomas Heyward Jr., South Carolina. And this is
Dead History.
Dead History. Hey guys, TJ back with you, here with Henry.
Hello.
And the guy behind us, Thomas Heyward Jr. of
South Carolina.
South Carolina. I keep almost tricking you on that one, huh? Because there's two of them, North and South Carolina, right? Good job, though. So, South Carolina, amazing things to tell you about this guy. Not so good, though. The Heyward family, I believe at one point, was like the largest slave-holding family in the country. Yeah. So, and Thomas Heyward Jr., he had a couple of wives. We're going to tell you about that. But also, it is pretty known that he did impregnate at least one enslaved woman that he owned as a slave, and he became the grandfather of an African American who served in Congress back in the late 1800s. So, yeah, some mind-blowing stuff, right? Interesting, some not so good things, but interesting things nonetheless.
Yeah.
So, they did the likes, subscribes, comments, questions, they did it all. Now what do they gotta go get, Henry?
Popcorn, pretzels, potato chips, the soda, the chocolate.
The chocolate, alright, I like where your mind is at, attaboy. Alright, go get those snacks, go get those drinks, because it's time for the next Declaration of Independence Signer Series, Thomas Heyward Jr. of South Carolina. Sit back,
Relax.
and enjoy. Hey guys, welcome. TJ here with Dead History, and welcome to our next installment of our Declaration of Independence Signer series, as we're taking a look at Thomas Heyward Jr. of South Carolina. Hope everyone's doing well out there. It's good to be back with our Declaration of Independence Signer series. Last week, of course, we took a little bit of a hiatus, but not really, because we released a very, very fun and special video about our trip and our tour to the White House in Washington, D.C. Both Henry and myself took a tour of the White House, so if you haven't watched that video, definitely check it out. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And now we're back this week with our Declaration of Independence Signer series, picking up where we left off, this time with our second signer from the state of South Carolina, Thomas Heyward Jr. Some lot of really interesting things to get into about Heyward. Really, some fascinating things that are just really interesting, and some that are not so pretty, that are kind of ugly, but still interesting nonetheless. So looking forward to this one. One of my favorite graves down in South Carolina. I think he has a really interesting grave site. Can't wait to show you that. So I'm flying solo for the audio portion. Let's just jump right in. Let's get into it here with Thomas Heyward Jr. of South Carolina. The eldest son of a wealthy planter, Thomas Heyward Jr. was born at his father's home, Old House, in St. Luke's Parish, which is now Jasper County, in the province of South Carolina, about 25 miles north of Savannah, Georgia, on July 28th of 1746. He was in the 5th generation of the Heyward family in America. That family's pioneer settler, Daniel, was among the early English colonists who came to make a new settlement in Carolina in 1670. He came from Little Eaton, a tiny village near Derby on the west bank of the River Derwent in Midlands, England. Today, still a beautiful fertile valley of rolling hills and flood plains. The early Heyward generations in America had been successful planters of crops such as indigo and cotton. But the signer's father, Colonel Daniel Heyward, who lived from 1726 to 1777, was the son of Captain Thomas and Hester Taylor Heyward of James Island, South Carolina, was among those to also grow rice, the golden seed from Madagascar, which became the big money crop of low country South Carolina. His father acquired thousands of acres of land stretching from the Combahee River south toward Beaufort and Savannah, and was an astute, very successful planter and businessman. His mother Mary, who lived from 1727 to 1761, was the daughter of William and Mary Butler Miles of the parish of St. Andrew in Berkeley County, South Carolina. They had 6 children. Thomas used the junior suffix to differentiate him from his father's younger brother of that name. And that river is the Combahee River. It's spelled C-O-M-B-A-H-E-E. So it looks like Combahee or Combahee, but it's actually Combahee is the way it's pronounced. Interesting the way things are pronounced in different parts of the country, that's for sure. The father, convinced of the importance of intellectual cultivation, determined to bestow upon his son all the advantages which a thorough education might impart. Accordingly, the best school in the province was selected for young Heyward, who with diligence became well acquainted with the Latin language and such other studies as at the time were taught in the most respectable schools and seminaries. He then entered the law office of a Mr. Parsons, a barrister of some eminence in South Carolina at that time, and a gentleman distinguished for his professional learning and practical skill. The father was also a strong royalist, devoted to the British crown, and upon his son accomplishing the usual term of study, young Mr. Heyward was sent to England to complete his legal preparation, to which he applied himself in the same manner of diligence as his earlier studies. He was admitted to the Middle Temple, Cambridge University, London, in 1765, and on May 25th of 1770, he was called to the bar by the Inns of the Court. While in England, Mr. Heyward became deeply impressed with the injustice of the prevailing feeling there, that a colonial British subject was quite inferior, and should be treated as such, to the native-born Englishman. The government seemed to act by appointing to office in the colonies few but natives of the British Isles, and in its carelessness of the rights and privileges of the colonists, as if they were not equally protected by the broad reach of the British Constitution. These things, even at that early age, alienated his affection from the mother country, and when he returned to his native land, it was with mortified feelings and a heartfelt desire to free it from bondage of transatlantic rule. But first, he commenced a tour of Europe, which occupied him for several years. This was an advantage which he enjoyed beyond most of the youth of the colonies, and it gave him a superior means of gaining a first-hand knowledge of the different countries of Europe. This also gave him a rare opportunity to contrast the industry and simplicity of his countrymen with the indolence and luxury, the pride and haughtiness so prevalent on the old continent. At length, satisfied with the observations he had made of the men and manners abroad, he returned, with anticipation and pleasure, to his native country, where he devoted himself with great zeal for a man of fortune to the labors of the practice of law. And of course, just reading from different sources, as I always like to do, Thomas Heyward Jr., lawyer, statesman, landowner, soldier, received his early education at home and read law in an office at Charleston, South Carolina. He went to London and was admitted to the Middle Temple, Cambridge University, London, on January 20th of 1765. And on May 25th of 1770, he was called to the bar by the Inns of Court. He was admitted to the bar in South Carolina on January 22nd of 1771. The following year, he was elected to the Commons House of Assembly from St. Helens Parish and was a delegate to the Provincial Convention at Charleston on July 6th of 1774, when news of the blockade of Boston Harbor was received. Like the other three South Carolina signers, Heyward studied law in England. Not only was this considered good professional training, but residence in the mother country was a distinct status symbol among South Carolina aristocrats. At 25, Heyward was back in Carolina engaged in legal practice. And at age 26, he was a member of the Provincial Assembly. Thomas Heyward, the son of Colonel Daniel and Mary Miles Heyward, was born on July 28th of 1746 at the Old House Plantation in St. Luke's Parish, Jasper County, South Carolina. The Heywards first arrived in Charleston during 1670 when Captain Thomas Heyward and his brother Daniel emigrated from Little Eaton, England. Thomas married after arriving in America. Upon his death, Captain Thomas was survived by two sons, and both Daniel and Thomas were sent to England to live with another of their father's brothers to ensure they received an excellent education. Thomas returned from England after completing his education and married. Upon his death, he left one son, also named Thomas, the grandfather of Thomas the Signer. When Thomas was about 18 years old, he was drafted into the British Army during a time of turbulence with Indians. He remained in the service, made the rank of captain, and was stationed at Fort Johnson on James Island in Charleston Harbor. Thomas was rewarded for his meritorious service with a grant of land in St. Luke's Parish, Beaufort District that included the Old House Tract. Later, at the age of about 35 years, Thomas succumbed, leaving 6 sons, one of whom was named Thomas. The other sons and brothers of Thomas were Daniel, the father of Thomas the Signer, John, Samuel, Nathaniel, and William. Thomas's parents, the Signer that is, had 2 other children, John and William. Thomas's father remarried, taking Jane Elizabeth Gignilliat. It's Gignillaat. Gignilliat? Not really sure how you pronounce it. So he took her, Jane Elizabeth Gignilliat, as his second wife, giving Thomas 2 stepbrothers, James and Nathaniel, and a stepsister, Maria. Elizabeth died, and Thomas's father remarried, taking Elizabeth Simmons as his third wife. From this marriage, one child, Benjamin, was born in 1776. The plantation where Thomas Heyward, the Signer, of course, we're speaking of, lived was about 25 miles above Savannah, Georgia. His birth into a wealthy family assured him of an excellent education in the province. He furthered his studies by taking up law in both America and England. Prior to departing to London to complete his education, he studied law under Mr. Parsons in Charleston. During the course of his education, similarly to one of the Signers, Charles Carroll of Carrollton, Heyward became a serious student of Greek and Roman classics, which he continued to enjoy throughout his lifetime. Those topics, always percolating about liberty and Republican freedom, at times mesmerized him and essentially guided his thinking toward freedom for the colonies. He sensed irregularities with the law and the way Britain treated her colonies and colonists. After spending about 5 years in England, where he furthered his legal studies at one of the Inns of Court at the Temple, he took a short trip about Europe. By the time he returned to the colonies, he had clear and unwavering feelings toward Britain's policies. Heyward was about 25 years old when he arrived back in South Carolina, and because of what he considered condescending attitudes of the British toward him and other Americans while he was in England, he was personally disappointed by their actions and anxious to become involved in the American cause. His father, one of the Rice Kings of Charleston, undertook a project during 1760 to have a house constructed in the city for his son. During 1772, Heyward was elected to the South Carolina Assembly and remained in that capacity until 1775. At the time of his election, he had been practicing law for about 1 year. His entry into political life converged with the ongoing struggle of the colonists, who were, with each passing day, increasing their disgust with the policies of Parliament and the Crown over taxation and other tactics they saw as oppressive. In 1773, Thomas Heyward married Elizabeth Matthews, the daughter of one of the prominent planters of the area and the sister of Governor John Matthews. Thomas and Elizabeth had 5 children, but only one son, Daniel, reached adulthood. The others died in infancy. Heyward built a plantation known as Whitehall. In 1775, he was elected a delegate to the Second Continental Congress in place of John Rutledge, who was called home to take measures against an anticipated invasion by the British. Nevertheless, Heyward declined, explaining that he believed he was too young. So a couple other things here. Thomas Heyward Jr. was an American founding father, lawyer, jurist, and politician. Heyward was active politically during the Revolutionary era. Member of the Continental Congress, of course, representing South Carolina. We're going to get into more of that in part 2. Heyward was born in St. Luke's Parish, now known as Jasper County, South Carolina, the son of Mary Miles and Daniel Heyward. He was educated at home and then traveled to England to study law, where he was a member of the Honorable Society of the Middle Temple. Like all the young men who signed for South Carolina, Thomas Heyward was the son of a rich planter. He studied law in London and returned home to begin practicing at the age of 25. Soon after, he married and settled into Whitehall, a massive plantation home not far from his father's place. His parish sent him to the colonial legislature, which was squabbling with the governor over, what else? Taxes. While in London, Heyward had formed a disagreeable impression of the motherland. Brits, he was rankled to find, looked down upon those born in the colonies. South Carolinians were typically proud of their heritage, so much that they often held themselves apart from the other colonies. However, this did not mean that Heyward and his fellow colonists could ignore the plight of the Bostonians. When Parliament closed the port of Boston in response to the Boston Tea Party, South Carolina feared its ports were vulnerable to similar actions, and in turn called a convention to formulate a plan. What they did was simple. They ousted the royal governor, set up a new government, and wrote a new constitution, rationalizing it all by saying that such measures would remain in place only until differences with the mother country were resolved. So, I know you guys are going to think this is absolutely crazy, but after only about, 20 minutes or so, maybe 25 minutes, this is actually going to do it for part one, guys. Not a whole lot to tell you here in, part one about the early life of Thomas Heyward Jr. Of course, just like most South Carolinian, affluent people, people of wealth, he grew up, educated at home, pretty good education, went over to England to study law, and then came back to, of course, America, and then got involved in politics. I mean, that's pretty much the story of Thomas Heyward Jr. Of course, now in part two tomorrow, we're going to get into a lot of very, very interesting things about Heyward. Just to give you a little clue and a little hint, things about, of course, his relationship with slavery and how he owned many enslaved people, how he impregnated at least one of his enslaved people, and that led to him being the grandfather of a future congressperson. So you're going to learn about that. And then the fact that he is credited with even writing a song. Yes. All these interesting things are going to be in part two. Looking forward to showing you that and teaching you all about that tomorrow in part two. But this is going to do it for part one, guys. No bonus footage here for part one. I'm going to save all the bonus footage for part two tomorrow. And there is some really good bonus footage for this. So stay tuned for part two tomorrow. I thank you guys so much for all the support, all the subscribes, comments, questions, all of it. Thank you so much. Keep it all coming. We really appreciate it. And yeah, we will see you tomorrow for part two as we conclude our look of this Declaration of Independence signer from South Carolina, Thomas Heyward Jr. See you tomorrow, guys. Bye-bye.